mean I'll see it.
I never thought I'd be the guy posting one of these, but honestly, if I don't get this down somewhere, I think my brain is just going to rot from the inside out. My doctor keeps telling me that the brain does weird things when it's deprived of sensory input, especially after a major trauma like surgery, but what I felt, what I know was in that room, doesn't fit into a medical textbook. It was too solid, too present. I had to have an emergency procedure to repair both of my retinas. It was a freak thing, a complication from an infection that basically started peeling the insides of my eyes away. The recovery was supposed to be a week of absolute, total darkness. The surgeon was very specific, no light, not even a peek. I had these thick, industrial-grade blackout bandages wrapped around my head. It wasn't just dark, it was a void. You lose your sense of where your body ends and the room begins. My wife, Sarah, was incredible through it all. She took a week off work to be my eyes. She'd lead me to the bathroom with her hand on the small of my back, guiding me so I wouldn't smash my shins into the coffee table. She'd sit on the edge of the bed and feed me lukewarm soup, describing what was on the spoon so I wouldn't be surprised by the texture. She was my only link to the world I couldn't see anymore. By the third night, the isolation was starting to grate on me. My ears became hypersensitive. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from 2 rooms away, the faint whistle of wind through the window screens, and the rhythmic sound of Sarah's breathing. It was late, maybe around midnight, when I heard her move away from the bed. I heard the rustle of her jacket and the jingle of her keys. She leaned down, her breath warm against my ear, and whispered that she was heading to the 24-hour pharmacy because we were out of my high-strength ibuprofen. She told me she'd be back in 20 minutes and reminded me not to get out of bed. I heard her footsteps retreat down the hallway, the front door click shut, and the faint beep of her car alarm being set outside. The house fell into that deep, oppressive silence you only get in the middle of the night. I lay there, staring into the black felt of my bandages, trying to count my own heartbeats to pass the time. Maybe 5 minutes passed. Just 5 minutes of being alone. Then I felt it. The mattress at the foot of the bed groaned. It wasn't a sharp movement, but a slow, deliberate sinking, as if something substantial was crawling onto the mattress from the floor. My first thought was that Sarah had forgotten her phone or her wallet and had let herself back in quietly so as not to startle me. I waited for her to say something, but the room stayed silent. The mattress continued to depress, the tension in the springs pulling at the sheets under my legs. The weight moved up the bed, inching closer to my hip. It felt dense. Whatever was moving didn't have the light, graceful step of my wife. It felt like a concentrated mass, shifting slowly. Then I felt a hand. It wasn't Sarah's hand. Sarah's hands are always cold, her skin a bit rough from gardening. This hand was hot. It was unnaturally warm, like it had been sitting under a heat lamp, and the skin felt slick, almost oily. It reached out and began to stroke my hair. It started at my forehead, just above the bandage line, and ran all the way back to the pillow. Over and over. "Hey, back already?" I asked. My voice sounded thin and brittle in the dark. The hand stopped instantly. The fingers stayed pressed against my scalp, and I could feel a faint tremor in them. They didn't pull away. They just sat there, pinning my hair to the pillowcase. That's when the voice came. It didn't come from the person, or whatever it was, sitting on the bed next to my hip. It came from directly above me. It was hovering near the ceiling, maybe 2 feet from the crown of my head. It was Sarah's voice. It was her exact pitch, her exact inflection, but it sounded wrong. It sounded like a recording played through a speaker that was vibrating too hard. It had a metallic, buzzing edge to it. "I'm still at the store, honey," the voice whispered from the ceiling. "Don't talk to the thing on the bed." My entire body went rigid. I couldn't breathe. The air in the room suddenly felt thick, like I was inhaling wet wool. The hand on my head didn't move, but the weight on the mattress shifted. I could feel the thing leaning over me. I could smell it now. It didn't smell like a person. It smelled like raw, wet meat that had been left in a plastic bag in the sun, sweet, cloying, and metallic. It was the scent of a butcher shop floor after the drains have backed up. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt like it had been sewn shut. I was trapped in a box of my own skin, blinded by the bandages, with something horrific sitting inches from my face. I could hear its breath. It wasn't breathing like a human. It was a wet, rattling sound, like someone trying to suck the last bit of liquid through a straw. The hand started moving again. It traced the edge of my bandages, its oily fingers dipping underneath the gauze for a second, touching the sensitive, healing skin of my eyelids. I flinched, my heart hammering so hard against my ribs I thought it would crack a bone. The thing on the bed didn't like the movement. I felt a sudden, sharp pressure on my chest, like a knee was being driven into my sternum. It wasn't just a weight, it was a crushing force that made my lungs burn. The voice from the ceiling spoke again. It was laughing now, a low, distorted giggle that sounded like Sarah's laugh being chopped up by a fan. "It likes when you stay still," the ceiling voice said. "It likes the taste of the salt in your sweat." I felt something wet and sandpapery lick the side of my neck. It was a long, slow stroke that went from my jawline down to my collarbone. The moisture it left behind felt thick and viscous. I lay there, tears streaming out from under my bandages, mixing with the oily film left by the thing's touch. I have never felt more vulnerable in my entire life. I was a piece of meat on a plate, and this thing was just deciding where to bite first. The minutes felt like hours. The weight on my chest stayed constant, making every breath a shallow, painful struggle. The thing on the bed began to make a new sound, a low, rhythmic clicking, like teeth hitting together very fast. It was leaning so close that I could feel the heat radiating off its body. It felt like sitting next to an open oven. Then I heard it. The real sound. A car pulled into the driveway. The headlights must have flashed across the window, because for a split second, even through the blackout bandages, I saw a faint, ghostly glow of red. Then the engine cut out. The car door slammed. The weight on my chest vanished instantly. The mattress sprang back up so violently that my head bounced on the pillow. I heard a frantic, wet scrambling sound, like a dog with long claws trying to run on a hardwood floor. It moved toward the corner of the room, near the closet. There was a soft thud, and then silence. A moment later, the front door opened. "I'm back," Sarah called out from the kitchen. Her voice was normal. It was clear. It was coming from down the hall, not the ceiling. "Sorry it took so long. The line was huge." I heard her walking toward the bedroom. I wanted to yell, to tell her to run, to get out of the house, but I was still paralyzed. When she entered the room, she turned on the bedside lamp. I could tell by the slight change in the darkness behind my eyes. "Oh, honey, you're drenched in sweat," she said, her voice full of genuine concern. She sat on the edge of the bed, exactly where the thing had been, and reached out to touch my forehead. I shrieked. I couldn't help it. I pulled away from her, scrambling back until my head hit the headboard. "Whoa, whoa. It's just me. It's Sarah," she cried out, her hands up. I was gasping for air, my chest still aching from the pressure. "The closet," I choked out. "Sarah, look in the closet. There's something in the closet." I heard her get up. I heard the sliding door of our closet groan on its tracks. I held my breath, waiting for her to scream, waiting for the wet, rattling sound to start again. "There's nothing here, babe," she said after a few seconds. "Just our coats and the vacuum." You're just having a night terror. The doctor said the painkillers might cause hallucinations. She came back to the bed and wiped my face with a cool washcloth. But as she wiped my neck, she paused. I felt her finger trace the line where that thing had licked me. "What is this?" she asked, her voice dropping. "Did you spill something? It's all over your neck. It's like clear slime. And it smells. God, it smells like a morgue in here." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because as she was cleaning my neck, I heard a faint, tiny sound. It wasn't a hallucination. It was coming from the pillow right next to my ear. It was a tiny, microscopic whisper, a voice that sounded exactly like mine. "She doesn't see me," my own voice whispered into my ear. I'm still on the bed. I spent the next 4 days in that bed, in the dark, with Sarah never leaving my side. She thinks I'm traumatized from the surgery. She doesn't know that every time she kisses my forehead, I can feel the heat of those oily fingers hovering just an inch above her hand. I can hear the clicking of its teeth every time the room goes quiet. My bandages come off tomorrow. The doctor says my vision should be perfect. But I'm terrified to look. I'm terrified that when the gauze falls away and my eyes finally adjust to the light, I won't see my wife smiling at me. I'll see what's been sitting on my chest, watching me breathe, waiting for the lights to go out for good.
Next story.
My house is one of those old, drafty places where the floorboards groan if you even think about walking on them. It's got character, or at least that's what the realtor told me, but the basement was always the one part of the floor plan I couldn't quite wrap my head around. It wasn't just the dampness or the way the air seemed to sit still down there. It was the dead zone in the far corner, right behind the furnace. No matter what kind of bulb I screwed into the overhead socket, LED, incandescent, expensive industrial ones, they'd pop within 48 hours. Sometimes they'd just flicker and go out, but usually there was this sharp, crystalline snap, and I'd find the glass shattered on the concrete the next morning. I stopped replacing them after a while. I just stayed out of that corner. But a few nights ago, a massive storm rolled through the area and knocked out the main transformer on our street. The whole house went silent. You don't realize how much noise a refrigerator or a clock makes until they stop, and suddenly the house felt way too big. I heard the breaker trip with a metallic thud that echoed up through the floor vents. I knew I had to go down there. I couldn't just sit in the dark waiting for the food to spoil, and I needed to see if the sump pump was still working so the basement wouldn't flood. I didn't have a working flashlight, of course. The batteries were corroded, so I grabbed one of those thick, emergency pillar candles from the kitchen. The flame was small, maybe an inch high, throwing this weak, amber light that barely reached the walls as I started down the wooden stairs. Every step I took felt like I was descending into a different climate. The air got colder, thicker, and started to take on this sharp, metallic tang. It reminded me of the way a butcher shop smells after it's been hosed down, that raw, iron-rich scent of meat and cold water. I reached the bottom and held the candle out. The shadows in the basement were long and distorted, stretching across the junk I'd piled up over the years. My own shadow was a bloated, flickering shape that danced against the water heater. I made my way toward the electrical panel, which was tucked right into the edge of that dead zone. The further I walked, the more the candle seemed to struggle. The flame didn't flicker from a draft, it shrunk, pulling inward as if something was sucking the oxygen right out of the wick. I reached the breaker box and flipped the door open. The metal was freezing, almost painful to touch. As I reached up to reset the main switch, I saw it. To my left, on the foundation wall, there was a shadow. It wasn't my shadow. It was tall, impossibly thin, and it was standing perfectly still between the shadows cast by the shelving units. What made my stomach turn wasn't just that it was there, but the quality of the darkness. You know how shadows are usually just a duller version of the surface they're on? This was different. This was a hole in the world. It was a matte, velvet blackness that seemed to have depth, like a silhouette cut out of the very fabric of the room. I froze. I told myself it was just the way the candle was hitting a support beam. I shifted the candle to the right to change the angle, expecting the shadow to move or disappear. It didn't. It stayed pinned to the wall, even as my own shadow swung wildly across the room. Then, very slowly, the silhouette began to peel itself away from the concrete. It didn't look like a person stepping out of a doorway. It looked like a piece of the night was detaching itself from the wall. It moved onto the floor, and that's when I realized it wasn't a reflection of light anymore. It was an entity. It moved with a sickening, fluid motion, like spilled ink sliding across a tilted table. It didn't make a sound. No footsteps, no fabric rustling. Just a suffocating silence that made my ears ring. As it got closer, that iron-like smell intensified, becoming so pungent I could almost taste it on the back of my tongue, a salty, raw, visceral sensation that made me want to gag. It felt like I was standing next to an open wound. I tried to back away, but my legs felt like they were sinking into wet cement. I was rooted there, watching this thing approach. It was at least 7 feet tall, but it had no face, no eyes, just a smooth, undulating surface of pure void. When it entered the direct glow of my candle, it didn't cast a shadow behind it. Instead, the light itself seemed to fail. The amber glow didn't illuminate the thing swallowed the light. I watched the flame on my candle turn from orange to a sickly, pale blue, then vanish entirely. Total darkness hit me like a physical weight. It was instantaneous and absolute. In that second, the temperature dropped so fast I could see the ghost of my own breath in the fraction of a second before the light died. I felt a presence directly in front of me, a pressure in the air that felt dense and suffocating. Then, I felt the fingers. They weren't like human hands. They felt oily, like they were coated in some kind of thick, viscous fluid that never quite dried. They were unnaturally long, wrapping around my throat with a grip that was agonizingly cold. It wasn't a sharp pain, but a deep, aching frost that felt like it was freezing the blood in my veins. The skin where the thing touched me felt like it was being rubbed with raw sandpaper. I tried to scream, but the air wouldn't leave my lungs. My throat was constricted, and the smell was overwhelming now, the scent of a fresh kill, of something wet and internal exposed to the air. It was the smell of a locker room mixed with a slaughterhouse. I heard the voice then. It didn't come from ears. It sounded like it was vibrating inside my own skull, scraping against the bone. It was a wet, raspy sound, like someone trying to speak with a mouthful of pennies. "Thank you for bringing the light," it whispered. The words felt like they were being carved into my mind. I was getting hungry. I felt a sharp, stinging sensation on my neck, like a dozen tiny needles piercing the skin. I could feel something warm, my own warmth, sliding down my collar. It was a slow, rhythmic pulling sensation, as if the thing was drinking directly from the heat of my body. My vision started to swim, and my knees finally gave out. I hit the concrete hard, but I couldn't even feel the impact. All I could feel was that oily grip and the sensation of being drained. I don't know how long I was down there. I woke up when the power finally kicked back on. The overhead lights in the rest of the basement hummed to life, but the bulb in the dead zone stayed dark. I was lying on the cold floor, my skin pale and clammy. My throat was bruised, and when I wiped my neck, my hand came away stained with a dark, tacky substance that wasn't just blood. It was darker, thicker, and stayed on my skin no matter how hard I scrubbed. I haven't been back down there since. I moved my washer and dryer into the kitchen, and I keep the basement door deadbolt and taped shut. But sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet, I can hear something moving against the underside of the floorboards. It's a slow, sliding sound, like a wet cloth being dragged over wood. And every morning, I find a new light bulb in the hallway or the kitchen has gone dark, the glass snapped clean through, leaving nothing but an empty socket and a lingering, metallic scent in the air. It's still down there, and it's not just hungry for the light anymore. It's learned that I'm the one who brings it.
Next story.
I never really thought much about how our bodies lie to us until I started messing with my own perception. You know that thing they teach you in middle school biology? How everyone has a tiny hole in their vision where the optic nerve plugs into the eye. Usually, your brain is just a really good editor, patching over that dead zone with whatever colors are nearby so you never notice the gap. It's supposed to be a safety feature, a way to keep the world looking seamless. But if you focus on it long enough, if you really force your eyes to stop corrected the image, the edit starts to fail. It began because I was getting into this deep focus meditation stuff I found on some obscure forum. The goal was to reach a state of sensory deprivation without needing a tank. You just sit in front of a mirror in a room with very dim lighting and stare at a single point on your forehead. If you do it right, your peripheral vision starts to bleed away into a gray haze, and eventually, your brain gets bored of the image and starts to hallucinate. They call it the Troxler effect. Most people see their faces distort or turn into monsters, but it's just your neurons misfiring. At least, that's what I told myself the first few nights. I was sitting on my bedroom floor, the only light coming from a single candle behind me. I stared at that spot between my eyes and the reflection, breathing slowly, waiting for the edges of the room to dissolve. The walls melted into a dull, flat charcoal color. My own face started to blur, the features softening like melting wax. That's when I noticed the spot. Right in the center of my gaze, there was a pinprick of something that wasn't the mirror and wasn't the wall. It was a tiny flicker of static, like a dead pixel on a television screen. I didn't blink. I pushed harder, keeping my gaze locked until my eyes burned. The static didn't go away. Instead, it began to expand. It wasn't just a blur anymore, it was a hole. The fill-in mechanism of my brain just quit. The patch of wall behind my head in the reflection didn't look like a wall anymore. It looked like a doorway. It was tiny at first, but as the minutes ticked by, the blind spot grew until it took up the entire space where my reflected chest should have been. I wasn't looking at a reflection of my room anymore. I was looking through a lens into a space that was impossibly dark. It wasn't the darkness of a room with the lights off. It was a dense, suffocating void that felt like it had mass. It felt like a physical weight pressing against the back of my retinas. Then, something moved inside the hole. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might bruise the bone. Inside that darkness, about 10 feet back from the threshold of my blind spot, there was a room. It looked like a basement, but the walls were made of something that looked like wet, raw meat. The floor was slick with a dark, viscous fluid that pooled in the corners. It didn't look like blood, it was too dark, almost black, but the way it caught the faint, sickly light from within that dimension made my stomach turn. In the center of that room, there was a chair. And sitting in that chair was me. But it wasn't the me I see when I look in the mirror every morning. This version of me was skeletal, his skin pulled so tight over his skull that it had started to tear at the corners of the mouth. His eyes were gone, replaced by jagged, cauterized holes that looked like they had been burned out with a soldering iron. He was strapped down with rusted wire that cut deep into his forearms, leaving ribbons of shredded flesh hanging off his bones. The smell hit me then, not through my nose, but through a memory of a smell. It was the stench of an old, forgotten refrigerator full of rotting pork mixed with the sharp, acidic sting of industrial cleaner. It was a thick, cloying odor that seemed to coat the back of my throat. The me in the chair began to scream. I couldn't hear it with my ears, but I felt the vibration of it in my teeth. It was a raw, wet sound, the kind of noise a person makes when their vocal cords have been shredded from days of non-stop wailing. His jaw unhinged further than any human jaw should, revealing a throat that was packed with what looked like human hair and broken teeth. He was thrashing, the wire biting deeper into his wrists, spraying that dark, oily fluid against the meat walls. Behind him, something else shifted in the shadows. It was tall, impossibly thin, and its limbs moved with the jerky, unnatural precision of a spider. It didn't have a face, just a vertical slit that ran from where its forehead should be down to its chest. It reached out a long, multi-jointed finger and traced the line of the other me's collarbone, pressing down until the bone snapped with a sickening, muffled crunch. The thing looked toward the viewfinder, toward me, and I realized it knew I was watching. I tried to look away. I tried to blink, to stand up, to scream, but I was paralyzed. It was like my optic nerve had become a hook, and the thing on the other side was reeling me in. The blind spot was growing faster now, swallowing the mirror, swallowing the candle, swallowing the edges of my bedroom. The darkness was leaking out of the hole and into my reality. I watched as the creature leaned over the mangled version of myself and began to peel the skin away from his chest in long, rhythmic strips. It did it with a strange kind of tenderness, like a parent peeling a fruit for a child. The me in the chair wasn't just screaming anymore, he was pleading, his mangled hands twitching in their wire restraints. I could see his ribs now, white and gleaming through the mess of muscle and fat. The creature took one of the ribs and snapped it off, then turned back toward the hole in my vision. It started walking toward the camera, toward the blind spot. With every step it took, the real world around me felt more fragile, like a thin sheet of glass about to shatter. I felt a cold, oily sensation creeping over my skin, the same texture as the fluid on that basement floor. The creature's slit face began to peel open, revealing rows of needle-like teeth that were stained a deep, permanent rust color. It was only inches away from the threshold now. I could see the pores in its translucent, gray skin. I could see the way the light from my world died as it touched the edge of that darkness. In a moment of pure, blind terror, I did the only thing I could. I reached out and shoved my thumbs into my own eyes. The pain was a white-hot explosion that shattered the trance. I fell backward, overbalancing and smashing my head against the bed frame. I lay there on the floor, gasping, my hands over my face, waiting for the creature to grab my ankles and pull me into the meat room. I waited for the wire, for the chair, for the slow peeling of my skin. But the room was quiet. I forced myself to open my eyes. My vision was blurry and swimming with dark spots from the pressure I'd applied, but I was back in my bedroom. The candle had flickered out, leaving only the pale moonlight filtering through the curtains. I looked at the mirror. It was just a mirror. My reflection looked normal, pale, terrified, and shaking, but normal. I haven't slept in 3 days. Every time I close my eyes, I see that meat room. I see the version of me that didn't get away. And the worst part is, I can still feel it. Even now, as I'm typing this, I can feel that tiny dead zone in the center of my vision. It's not just a glitch. It's not just biology. It's a window that's been left unlocked. I realized that we don't have blind spots because of some evolutionary mistake. We have them because there are things living in the gaps of our reality, things that feed on the parts of us that shouldn't exist. Our brains hide those spaces from us to keep us sane, but once you've seen what's behind the curtain, the brain can't Photoshop it out anymore. Lately, I've noticed the spot is getting bigger again, even when I'm not meditating. I'll be washing the dishes or walking down the street, and for a split second, I'll see a flash of a wet, red wall or hear the faint, wet thud of a snapping bone. I'm starting to think that the me I saw in that chair wasn't some alternate version of myself. I think it's the original. And I'm just the reflection that managed to wander too far from the glass. Yesterday, I looked in the bathroom mirror to brush my teeth, and for a heartbeat, I didn't see my own eyes. I saw the jagged, burned-out holes. And behind me, standing just where the blind spot usually sits, I saw a long, gray finger reaching out to touch my shoulder. I don't think I can keep the light out much longer. The void is hungry, and it's finally figured out how to bridge the gap. Be careful when you stare too long at nothing. Sometimes the nothing starts staring back.
Next story. Next story is yours. Take a look at the shadow in the corner of your room. Are you sure it was that shape a minute ago? Subscribe or be the next in line.